to the big kick-off, the show to get you prepped for the weekend with the latest information, latest stats, and so much more to get you geared up for the weekly predictions and just a little bit of information for you to show off to your friends as well with our in-house resident stat expert in Mark Stats. And I bet if you're having a look at the Premier League table right now, you must be thinking to yourself, have we teleported back to the early 2000s? What is this, Arsenal at the top of the Premier League table? You are right, Arsenal are at the top of the Premier League table and all eyes will be on them this weekend with arguably one of the biggest fixtures this weekend as well between Arsenal and Manchester United. Now, we all know about this modern classic rivalry between these two sides. Sir Alex Ferguson against Arsene Wenger, Roy Keane versus Patrick Vieira, Pizzagate, so much more. But is that the same rivalry this time round though, you think?
I think you could argue that times have changed and rivalries have been altered somewhat. But for both sets of fans, there's still that extra bit of juice whenever it's Man United versus Arsenal. So I think it'll be the exact same thing this weekend. And the best part is both teams have very different fortunes at the moment too. So I think it's going to be a really exciting fixture on Sunday, and both sets of fans are going to be really, really up for it.
Yeah, all the eyes will be on this fixture, particularly as well when it comes to how well Arsenal have been doing. As I mentioned, they are at the top of the table because they are unbeaten and 100% perfect start for Arsenal as well. Who would have thought? Because just about a year ago, it was 180 degrees, completely different. They had no wins, they had no goals, but this time around, they really started off with a bang.
You go back to May at St. James's Park, and the mood around Arsenal was absolutely dreadful that day when they lost to Newcastle. But fast forward a couple of months, and now everything seems to be happy blue skies. It's just absolutely brilliant. 5 wins in their first 5 games. So many goals being scored. They've scored at the very least 2 goals in every single game so far. And I think Gabriel Jesus, Zinchenko, all the new additions have given them a new lease of life. And Arsenal just look like a completely different team to the Arsenal we saw last season.
I guess trust the process really does work, doesn't it, for Arsenal? But just having a look at this matchup as well, as you mentioned, Arsenal are much further along when it comes to their rebuilding project compared to Manchester United, who at this point just kind of seems like they're back to square one. So would you say going to this one and looking back at how they've matched up against each other, that Arsenal has a bit of an edge over the Red Devils?
I think you could argue that when you look at the historic head-to-head over the last 6 games, you could say that it's somewhat still balanced. Last year, it was a 3-1 win for Arsenal at the Emirates. It was a 3-2 slim margin victory for United at Old Trafford. The season prior to that, it was a stalemate at the Emirates, and it was a slim 1-0 win for Arsenal. So if you look at the last 6 games, there have been some upset in opposition stadiums, there have been some draws, and there have been some United victories. I would argue it is somewhat simple, but in the context of this season, I wouldn't so much look at historical data. I would look at the current form because Arsenal are just on cloud 9 at the moment.
So why have they been so good then? Tell us.
I think goal scoring has tremendously added quality. You look at Gabriel Jesus coming in and you look at their form guide. I think one of the most important thing to take note from the form guide is the fact that at the bare minimum, they have scored 2 goals in every single one of their games so far. That is something you wouldn't be able to say about Arsenal last season or the season prior to that, because goal scoring had always been an issue sometimes. But this year, with the addition of Gabriel Jesus, with Martinelli being in fiery form as well, they look really, really good up front.
What about Manchester United then? We all know about the annihilation by Brentford, of course. What a weak start for the Red Devils so far this season. But it seems like they are just picking up just a little bit, and it all started with their win against Liverpool. That really lifted their confidence up. And while they aren't blowing teams away at the moment, they recently just had a narrow win over Leicester City. But you're seeing signs of a little bit of improvement, aren't we?
You could argue that. You could argue that United are improving to a large extent. But if you look at United's form guide at the moment, the one glaring thing to take note from it is the complete opposite of what we just spoke about at Arsenal. With Arsenal, we said that at the bare minimum, they scored 2 goals in every single one of their games. But for United, 3 out of their 5 games so far has only featured 1 goal. Only in 1 game have they scored more than 1 goal, and that was that 2-1 win over Liverpool. When I look at this United team, I really don't know where the goals are going to come from. It's pretty dry out there at the moment at Old Trafford.
Well, another cause of concern as well for Manchester United, and it's a form that they've brought along from last season as well, and it comes through their set pieces, in specific defending set pieces, and a lot of occasions this season as well when it comes to dead ball situations. What do you put your finger on? Is it just the setup? Is it the lack of organisation? Is it just the fact that there are just some players who are not willing to take responsibility in these set-pieces situations for Manchester United?
Well, Michelle, I think you could argue that it's a mixture of everything that you just mentioned. It's very difficult to pinpoint one thing with Man United because the reality is they have been defensively poor throughout last season. This season, things have slightly improved, but I would argue that when it comes to Lisandro Martinez, and now I'm a big fan of him, and I think he's been phenomenal, but make no mistakes, teams would look to target him in set-piece situations like Brentford did, like Ivan Toney did, and I think Arsenal, given that this season they've scored 4 goals from set pieces already, they'll be looking at the United defence, knowing that Lisandro Martinez is an absolutely brilliant player, but they look at his height and think to themselves, maybe this is something we could exploit in set-piece situations.
What about in terms of, you mentioned earlier, Manchester United aren't scoring much goals, but I also noticed that Arsenal haven't kept too many clean sheets so far this season, only 2. And one of it was against a very, very poor Bournemouth side as well. So could we perhaps see both sides to score in this matchup?
I was about to just suggest that as well. I think whilst one team does have a bit of an edge in terms of their offensive prowess, but both teams have been slightly shaky at the back. You saw an own goal from Saliba, you saw a mistake from Gabriel, so I'd like to think that this is a game that would feature both teams scoring at the very least.
So, predictions then. Who do you think will nick this one? If both teams are to score, how many goals for each and who's the winner?
Both teams will at the very least concede 1 goal, but I'm going to go for a slim victory for Arsenal.
Are we saying 2-1 for this one?
Around 2-1. Yes.
Around 2-1. Okay, slim victory, but both teams to score for this one. Another big fixture this weekend, of course, is the early kickoff on Saturday. Jurgen Klopp's not going to like this one. It is the Merseyside derby, of course, between Everton and Liverpool. Now, this is truly, truly a classic local derby, depending on the close proximity between the two stadiums. In fact, from one stadium, if you look out, you can actually see the other stadium because it's just right across Stanley Park. That is just how close they are. And in recent times as well, we would perhaps say that Liverpool and Everton have not been on the same level of each other for a really, really long time. But going into this one, they've had a poor start to the season. And looking back at their head-to-head matchups over the last few fixtures, many might think, because Liverpool are who they are, that it will be a Liverpool-heavy start. But actually, that's not really the case, is it, Keesh?
Really not. I agree as well. I think when it comes to Liverpool versus Everton, you'd like to think that Liverpool have dominated over the last few years. But if you look at their head-to-head over the last 5 fixtures, what you will find is a slightly balanced fixture. Of course, last year, it was a 100% win record for Liverpool. They won at Anfield 2-0. They won at Goodison Park 4-1. But the season prior to that, there was that upset at Anfield when Everton beat them 2-0. So I think there's a bit of a cause for concern here in terms of realizing that just because it's a Merseyside derby, just because Liverpool have the upper hand in terms of squad quality, that it would be one-way street. It might not necessarily be a one-way street.
Another thing very interesting as well when it comes to the matchups between these two sides, more often than not, we like to talk about home advantage for the home teams, but that's not the case for Everton.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. I was about to argue that it's not as straightforward as it seems sometimes, this Merseyside derby, but that's on one hand, because on the other hand, if you look at their form guide, it's relatively disappointing at the moment. They've literally just scored 1 goal in every single game. I don't know where the goals are going to come from, but you know what's the worst thing, Michelle? It's that in their last 8 meetings against Liverpool at home, Liverpool, or rather Everton, have not ever beaten Liverpool at home in the last 8 meetings. And I think even that is a bit of a problem.
Why do you think Everton have been so poor then?
You could look at their recruitment. You could look at the kind of players that have left and have come in. Sometimes you look at Everton and you wonder the amount of money they spent in the last 5 seasons, and you compare that to the squad that they actually have now, and you ask yourself, where has it all gone wrong? But the biggest question mark at the moment is, till at least Calvert-Lewin returns to full fitness, I really don't know where that goal is going to come from, because they can't be depending on Anthony Gordon every single game.
Well, they have recently acquired Neil Maupay though, but again, that's also a question mark as well, because he's not the most prolific goal scorer. He has been fairly consistent for Brighton, but he's never really the kind that scored double figures season in, season out. But Liverpool, the same question to you then. I might not even go to the extent of saying it's all gone wrong, not just yet, but because of the high standards that Liverpool set themselves, this is far out from what they expected their start of the season to be. They thought it might be like Manchester City, but it's not.
And if you look at their form guide, the one glaring thing about Liverpool's last 5 results is that they've only kept 1 clean sheet. And you could argue that that clean sheet came against probably the worst side in the Premier League at the moment. Another side that just doesn't have anything going on for them up front, which is Bournemouth. With every other side that they faced, Newcastle, United, Palace, Fulham, they've conceded goals. And I think that's a bit of a cause for concern. That is something Jurgen Klopp will be thinking a lot about in the last couple of weeks, and including heading into the game this weekend.
So why have they been so particularly poor defensively? Because they have one of the best centre-backs in the world in Virgil van Dijk. They've also had one of the best goalkeepers in the world in Alisson Becker. But things are looking shaky, and it's very unlike Liverpool.
I think any Liverpool teams that we've noticed over the years, the engine of the team, the engine that runs the team and protects the backline has always been that midfield. And that midfield has undergone a lot of changes. And if you looked at the defensive stats just now, one of the things you'll notice is the number of tackles has dropped to some extent. And I think that because of the vast amount of changes that is happening in the middle of the park for Liverpool at the moment, it's taking them a bit of time to get readjusted back from square one. It is a transition phase at Liverpool at the moment. And whilst they go through this phase, that defense is going to be shaky for the time being.
Well, I think the injuries as well that Liverpool are facing really does not help. Let's get your predictions for this one then. Do you expect a clean sheet from Liverpool perhaps? As you mentioned, Everton not really having that firepower up front.
Everton not having the firepower, and I think this could be Liverpool's probably only their 2nd clean sheet in the Premier League this season. So I'm going to go for a Liverpool clean sheet and a Liverpool win too.
Liverpool clean sheet, Liverpool win. A lot of happy Liverpool fans watching this one right now. But we've got so much more coming your way and to bring to you as well all the action elsewhere around Europe and also the rest of England. In our second segment, we like to call the home ground teams. Right after this very quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Big Kickoff, the show to get you all geared up for the weekend. We spoke about the 2 biggest fixtures in the English Premier League. Let's hop over to the La Liga then. We spoke about Arsenal earlier. This is an ex-Arsenal manager in Unai Emery as he manages Villarreal, who finished somewhat mid-table last season. But perhaps with the start that they've had so far this season, Keesh, could they perhaps be the surprise package in La Liga?
They look really, really strong so far. They remain unbeaten, one of the few sides to still be unbeaten in La Liga. They've got an exciting bunch of players as well. And we know Unai Emery. I mean, regardless of his record in England, he's a quality head coach. He's led multiple sides to multiple sort of successes all across Europe. So when you have Unai Emery in charge and when you've had the start that they've had so far this season, I think it could be a really good season for Villarreal.
In terms of talking about the form and the identity, do you see Elche posing any sort of problems for Villarreal?
I think the one interesting thing about Elche is the fact that they've got a couple of very recognizable names. I think Kiko Casilla, former Real Madrid goalkeeper, I think it was at Leeds United for a while, if I'm not mistaken. He's a recognizable name, but the biggest one is Javier Pastore, who used to be at Paris Saint-Germain. He's a big recognizable name, but probably playing a big part role. But Elche have had a really frustrating start to La Liga this season. I think they're winless or they are very close to the bottom of the table. They're struggling for form at the moment, and I don't really see them causing any problems for Villarreal.
So when they have matched up in the past so far then, Keesh, I know we can't always rely on history, but sometimes it can give us a really good indication of what this match might look out to be. Has it always been a lot of Villarreal? Because actually when we look at it, it's been somewhat even on both sides. It
has really. Last season, I think Elche got that surprising 1-0 win at home, but at El Madrigal, they got absolutely smashed 4-1. And prior to that, the season before that, it was 2 draws, both home and away. So, in terms of historical record, you could argue that it's somewhat balanced. But you look at the quality of players available at Villarreal at the moment, from Gerard Moreno to Yeremy Pino to Giovanni Lo Celso. There's just quality all over the park at Villarreal at the moment. I'm a big fan of Samuel Chukwueze as well. I look at this Villarreal squad, I look at the start that they've had to the season, and I think they are major, major favourites for this one.
Well, based on what you've just told me and what we've just seen, it seems like it's also kind of another hard one to call. I'll veer towards Villarreal a little bit more because they come into this one with just a bit of a better form. But your predictions then?
I'm going to go for a reasonably easy Villarreal victory.
Reasonably easy Villarreal victory. Let's move on then back over to the Premier League because all eyes will also be on these two sides who are proving to be a bit of another surprise package as well in the English Premier League between Newcastle United and Crystal Palace. We all know about the great work Eddie Howe has done for Newcastle United, and just going into this one as well, do you foresee the momentum to be on Newcastle's side?
There's a lot of momentum for Newcastle at the moment. I know a lot of them are frustrated with that defeat against Liverpool last time.
A little bit unlucky, perhaps?
A little bit unlucky, you could argue. Great performance either way. I think Alexander Isak coming in has given them a major boost at the moment. But I think the most impressive thing about Newcastle has got to be their home form. We've heard about it all along, all the way growing up.
One of the best atmospheres in England.
Exactly, one of the best atmosphere. But it's rarely been reflected in terms of results. However, in recent times, it's been turned into an absolute fortress. You look at the last 7 fixtures at home, only a single defeat, 5 victories and a draw, and you could argue that draw could have possibly been a win too if it wasn't for that phenomenal comeback from Man City. So their home record is absolutely impressive, and any team going to St. James's Park at the moment is going to fear Newcastle.
Well, Newcastle have been very, very fearful in terms of the way that they play under Eddie Howe, but also Crystal Palace a little bit rejuvenated under Patrick Vieira. Wilfried Zaha in particular, who's one player who's always been on a lot of the big 6 radars as well over multiple transfer windows. A little bit surprised perhaps that he hasn't made that big move just yet, but he is their big man, he is their talisman. Is there a risk, however, that Crystal Palace is maybe just a little bit too over-reliant on Wilfried Zaha?
In the context of this season, maybe. To be fair, they do have attacking options up front, from Edouard to Jean-Philippe, Mateta, to a whole bunch of different strikers. Eberici Eze can score goals as well. Michael Olise has always contributed. But I agree, in the context of this season, they have somewhat depended a bit too much on Zaha. But this season, Wilf has been brilliant. You can't say much about it. You look at his, it's 4 goals so far in 4 games, 3 shots per game he's averaging. He's averaging 2 dribbles, 24.3 average passes per game. And I think the most incredible thing about Wilfried Zaha, you mentioned, Michelle, that it's a bit strange that he hasn't made a move to a bigger club. I actually absolutely love it that he hasn't made a move to a bigger club.
You're a loyalty kind of man, aren't you?
Because I absolutely love looking at the smaller teams have big world-class stars like Wilf Zaha, because it levels the playing field to a large extent, and that's exactly what it does for Crystal Palace.
Well, I love the fact that you're the only one that has to make predictions today because it's another one that's so hard to call, isn't it? I mean, you're on the spot. What do you make of this one? Do you think St. James's Park giving them enough advantage over Crystal Palace?
Look, Zaha in the post-match interview last week was really frustrated with their inability to close out that game. I understand the frustration. I know they've played well, but they haven't gotten the results. I'd like to back them, but St. James's Park is on a whole different frenzy mode at the moment, and I'm going for a Newcastle win here at home.
Well, Newcastle win for our resident in-house stat expert in Marsat. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. We hope you guys have gotten as much information, as much statistics that you need to make your weekly predictions as well. Once again, this is, of course, the big kickoff. Until next time, my name is Michelle, and this is Marsat.